What would you do if everything you worked for, every dollar, every sacrifice, every prayer, vanished overnight? That's exactly what happened to Pastor Daniel Miller. His church account, holding more than $550,000 of offerings and donations, was hacked and drained in a single night. But the true horror? The hacker wasn't some stranger hiding overseas. No, it was one of his own members. Someone he had prayed for, counseled, and trusted. And Daniel's reaction would shock everyone. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to Bite Crimes. Your support helps us keep bringing you chilling, educational, and true crime stories from the dark side of the internet. Now sit back. Let's begin. For nearly 2 decades, Pastor Daniel Miller stood at the heart of Grace Haven Ministries, a modest church in a quiet suburban town in Georgia. At 49 years old, he was respected by his congregation not just for his preaching, but for his quiet sacrifices. He wasn't a flashy preacher with designer suits or luxury cars. Instead, he was known as the pastor who visited the sick at midnight, who prayed with grieving families, who often gave away his own salary to struggling members. The church wasn't wealthy, but it was steady. Members, young and old, trusted him with their hearts and their finances. Offerings were carefully collected, logged, and deposited into the church account. This fund supported not just a ministry, but food drives, shelter programs, and community outreaches. For Daniel, the church was more than an institution. It was his family. But all it took was one moment, one crime, to bring his life crashing down. It was a Monday morning in early spring when the church treasurer, Mrs. Evelyn Brooks, phoned Pastor Daniel in tears. "Pastor, the account, it's empty. It's all gone." Daniel thought she must be exaggerating. But when he rushed to the bank, his heart sank. The account, holding nearly $550,000, years of donations and savings, had been drained overnight through a series of online transfers. The shock was unbearable. His first thought wasn't even about the money. It was about trust. How would he face his members on Sunday? How would he explain to the offerings they had sacrificed? The retiree who skipped meals to give, the young family that tithed faithfully, had vanished. The bank confirmed what Daniel dreaded. This was no clerical error. It was a hack. Someone had gained access to the church's online account, rerouted the funds through a chain of crypto wallets, and disappeared into the shadows of cyberspace. The local police quickly involved the Cybercrime task force. Investigators pored over the transaction logs. The pattern was sophisticated, a classic smash-and-grab cyber theft. Funds were siphoned into smaller accounts, converted into cryptocurrency, then moved through tumblers designed to erase their origins. To the average church member, it looked like the work of anonymous overseas hackers. But the investigators noticed something strange. The IP addresses used in the transfers weren't bouncing from Russia or China. They originated locally, very locally. At first, Pastor Daniel refused to believe it. Surely, this had to be some digital mirage, some trick of the hacker's craft. But the evidence grew clearer. Whoever did this knew the church's system inside out. Still, Daniel held on to hope. He prayed for justice, asking God to reveal the truth. Weeks later, detectives delivered the news. They had traced the transfers to an individual connected with Grace Haven Ministries. The name? Marcus Allen. Marcus wasn't just a random member. He was a 32-year-old IT consultant Daniel had once helped off the streets. Years ago, Marcus was unemployed, nearly homeless, struggling with addiction. Daniel had prayed with him, counseled him, even raised money from the congregation to get him back on his feet. In gratitude, Marcus had joined the church, volunteering to manage their live stream setup and occasionally assisting with the online giving platform. For Daniel, this was more than betrayal. This was like a son stabbing his own father in the back. When detectives told him, Daniel sat in silence, his hands trembling. He remembered the countless nights he had counseled Marcus, the moments he vouched for him when others doubted. To think that Marcus had used that trust to destroy everything, it was unbearable. When word spread, the church community was torn apart. Some couldn't believe Marcus was guilty, arguing that he must have been framed. Others were furious, demanding swift justice. For many, The sense of safety they once felt at Grace Haven was shattered. Pastor Daniel tried to keep the church together, preaching forgiveness even while he wrestled with rage. But behind closed doors, he was unraveling. He barely slept. He stared at the empty bank statements late into the night. And deep down, a dangerous thought began to grow. What if justice never comes? Detectives assured Daniel that the case would go to trial, that Marcus would face charges. But legal wheels turned slowly. Weeks passed, then months. Marcus, free on bail, still showed up around town. He smiled. He laughed. It was as though nothing had happened. One evening, Daniel drove past a local cafe and saw Marcus inside, sipping coffee, chatting with friends. Rage consumed him. How could this man sit so casually while families in his congregation were crushed, while the church's entire future hung in ruins? That night, Daniel prayed, but for the first time in years, prayer didn't bring peace. Instead, he felt only the pounding of anger in his chest. On a stormy Friday evening, Daniel confronted Marcus outside his small apartment. Accounts differ on what was said. Some neighbors reported hearing raised voices, Marcus begging for understanding, Daniel accusing him of betrayal. What is certain is that within minutes, Marcus lay lifeless on the ground. The pastor, the man who had preached forgiveness for decades, had taken justice into his own hands. The arrest was swift. Police arrived to find Daniel in shock, hands trembling, muttering scriptures through tears. He was charged with second-degree murder. The news stunned the entire state. Headlines screamed, "Pastor turned killer and man of God murders hacker." For many, it was unthinkable. For others, it was the inevitable conclusion to a tragedy born of betrayal and rage. In the weeks that followed, Grace Haven Ministries collapsed under the weight of scandal. Some members left entirely, unable to reconcile the man they had trusted with the crime he committed. Others defended Daniel, saying no one could understand the pain of watching your life's work destroyed by someone you loved. But for investigators, the case was clear. Cybercrime had sparked a murder, and the consequences rippled far beyond the stolen money. And yet, what investigators uncovered next would complicate everything further, because Marcus Allen wasn't working alone. Just when Pastor Daniel thought betrayal couldn't cut any deeper, detectives uncovered a shocking twist. Marcus had an accomplice, and this person was even closer to Daniel than he could have imagined. Detectives had already shocked Pastor Daniel with the truth that Marcus Allen, his former protege, was a hacker who drained over $550,000 from the church account. But the investigation didn't stop there. As they combed through Marcus's digital trail, investigators noticed repeated logins tied to a second device. This wasn't Marcus working alone. Someone else was logging into the church's financial portal, helping to authorize transactions and covering Marcus's tracks. That someone was Clara Brooks, the church treasurer's daughter. Clara had grown up in Grace Haven Ministries. Her mother, Evelyn Brooks, had served faithfully as treasurer for over a decade. Clara, in her late 20s, had drifted between jobs and often confided to Pastor Daniel about her financial struggles. He had prayed for her, even slipped her cash on more than one occasion when rent was due. But behind the scenes, Clara was sinking into debt, credit cards, payday loans, and even an online gambling problem. Teaming up with Marcus seemed like a quick way out. She had access to church banking records through her mother's position, while Marcus had the technical skills to execute the hack. Together, they pulled off what they thought would be the perfect heist. When Daniel heard Clara's name, it was like a dagger piercing his chest. This wasn't just betrayal from a member. It was betrayal from the very family he had trusted to guard the church's finances. The emotional weight crushed him. His sermons grew heavy with grief. His congregation was restless. Some whispered that maybe God had abandoned their church. Others blamed Daniel himself, saying he should never have allowed Marcus or Clara near the finances. And all the while, Marcus remained dead, killed at Daniel's own hands, and Clara was now facing charges of cybercrime and conspiracy. When Pastor Daniel's case finally reached trial, the courtroom was packed. Local media swarmed the story, dubbing it The Pastor and the Hacker. Prosecutors painted a grim picture. A man of God who lost control, who abandoned his teachings of forgiveness and chose violence. They reminded the jury that no matter betrayal, Daniel had options. He could have waited for justice, sought restitution, or simply walked away. But instead, he was killed. The defense pleaded for mercy. They told the story of Daniel's sacrifices, of his devotion, of the unimaginable betrayal he endured. They described how watching Marcus walk free on bail, while families wept over stolen funds, pushed him past a breaking point. Witness after witness took the stand. Some members testified to Daniel's compassion and selflessness. Others spoke of the devastation they felt when the money was stolen, and how Daniel seemed haunted in the weeks before the murder. Clara also testified. With tears in her eyes, she admitted her role in the cyber theft. She confessed that Marcus convinced her it would be quick and untraceable, but she never imagined it would lead to death. The courtroom gasped as she described how Pastor Daniel had once prayed with her as a child, and now her crime had helped trigger his downfall. The trial wasn't just about facts. It was about emotions, betrayal, anger, desperation, and regret. For Daniel, the betrayal wasn't financial, it was spiritual. The money could have been replaced, but the trust, the faith, the bond between pastor and flock, that was gone forever. He often stared blankly in court, lips moving silently in prayer, but his eyes carried the look of a man broken beyond repair. For Clara, it was guilt. Not only had she stolen from her church family, she had indirectly cost Marcus his life and Daniel his freedom. And for the community, the trial forced a painful reflection. How had they missed the signs? How had their beloved pastor been pushed to such a dark place? After weeks of testimony, the jury returned with a verdict: guilty of second-degree murder. The judge sentenced Pastor Daniel Miller to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Clara Brooks, for her role in the cyber theft, received 12 years in federal prison. The courtroom was silent as Daniel was led away in handcuffs. Some members wept. Others bowed their heads in shame. In the end, 2 lives have been destroyed, one by cybercrime and one by anger. The story of Pastor Daniel and Marcus Allen isn't just about stolen money or a shocking murder. It's about the ripple effect of cybercrime. When hackers strike, they don't just drain accounts. They drain trust. They fracture communities. They destroy relationships. And when victims let anger take control, the consequences can spiral even further. Pastor Daniel, once a man of faith, became a cautionary tale of what happens when desperation gives way to vengeance. Marcus, once saved from the streets, lost his life because of greed. Clara, a daughter raised in the church, traded her integrity for quick cash. The lesson? No matter how deep the pain, taking the law into your own hands can turn a victim into a criminal. And that brings us to the end of today's story. A chilling reminder that cybercrime doesn't just happen in the shadows of the internet. It reaches into homes, families, and even pulpits. What do you think? Could Pastor Daniel have found another way? Or was he a man pushed too far by betrayal? Share your thoughts in the comment below. I'd love to hear them. Thank you for staying with us through this emotional and eye-opening story. If you found it powerful, please don't forget to like this video, drop your comments, and most importantly, subscribe to Bite Crimes, because it's your support that keeps us motivated to bring you more chilling, educational, and true crime stories from the dark side of the internet. Until next time, stay safe, stay vigilant, and remember, sometimes the greatest danger isn't out there in the shadows. It's a betrayal closest to home.